Good evening and welcome to our June reading of the 14th season of the Milwaukie Poetry Series. I'm Tom Hogan, the coordinator of the series, and we want to thank you all for being here tonight. We've had a terrific response, and we know that there are many different ways that you could spend your time, and we're delighted that you're here with us to hear our poet read tonight. It's been a tough year and a half too, and that's why our readings have gone to the virtual format that we're in tonight. But we hope that you are all safe and well. Thank you again for being here. I want to make some thanks. Firstly, thanks to the City of Milwaukie for their support. As I said, we have been going for 14 years, and they have been really supportive from the very beginning. Thanks to the Ledding Library in Milwaukie. We have a new library, as many of you know, a year and a half ago in Milwaukie that we were working on for a long time. And we have been a committee of the Ledding Library. So we are grateful for the support from them. I want to thank the Poetry Series, the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, because as you know, and I say regularly, you don't have something happen unless you have a group of people that are committed and who are working on it. So we do, and we are very grateful for them. Also want to thank the Willamette Falls Media Center. We are live streaming here from the Willamette Falls Media Center in Oregon City, and particularly our technician here, Josh Reynolds, who is absolutely terrific and is enabling this program to come to you. Thank you again. I have to say, I'm honored to introduce our poet this evening. Paulann Peterson was our first reader in the Milwaukie Poetry Series in November of 2007. She read again. She kicked off the 8th season of the Milwaukie Poetry Series in September of 2014, just after ending her second year as Poet Laureate, Oregon Poet Laureate. This was the year of the Stafford Centennial. And now she's reading again tonight as part of our virtual season. We have one more reading in our season this year. Emmett Wheatfall is going to be here next month in July. Paulann Peterson has 7 full books of poetry. Most recently, One Small Son from Salmon Poetry in Ireland. The American Library Association's book list calls One Small Son, and here's what they have to say about it, a veritable master class in the interweaving of metaphor and memory. Paulann's poems have appeared widely in many journals such as Poetry, The New Republic, Prairie Schooner, Willow Springs, Catamaran, Calyx, and the Internet's Poetry Daily. She was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University, and in 2006, she received the Hallbrook Award from Oregon Literary Arts. In 2013, she was Willamette Writers' Distinguished Northwest Writer. I already mentioned she was the Oregon Poet Laureate for 2 terms, 2010-2014. Would you join me in welcoming tonight our poet, Paulann Peterson?
Oh, thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. My gratitude to the Milwaukie Poetry Series, my gratitude to Tom Hogan, and all the Milwaukie Poetry Series committee members, past and present. My thanks for inviting me to give a reading this evening, but even more, my gratitude for this series. 14 years of fall to early summer monthly poetry readings given by Oregon poets. Is there any other Oregon series with a continuous run longer than 14 years? I think not. So my thanks to Milwaukie Poetry Series, my thanks to each of you for tuning in this evening. I'm going to read new poems, or newer poems this evening, as in poems that haven't found their way yet into a book. But I will begin with a poem from my latest book, One Small Sun, thanks to Milwaukie Poetry in Ireland. This poem was occasioned by a magazine, the Shambhala Sun, a Buddhist magazine that has articles, interviews, photographs about Buddhism and figures in Buddhism. And this particular issue had an article and a photo of the Dalai Lama on his treadmill. The Dalai Lama working out in a room lit by sunlight. There were high horizontal windows near the ceiling in this room, and the sunlight was streaming in. That was one article in this issue. And then this issue of Shambhala Sun also had an article entitled Our Original Goodness. The Shambhala Sun arrives with today's mail to tell me I'm perfect, as I am, but I could still use a little work. Early morning, and here I am again at work in these Buddhist fields of wisdom, in newly arrived light, reading this sun. I find I can be a sun, not the clouds that obscure it, perfect. Inside the sun, I've pulled up close to my nearsighted eyes. Sunlight seeps across polished wood floors in the room where the Dalai Lama walks on his treadmill. Distant cousin to the treadmill in my basement, exercise machine I use pretty much every day, but disdain. And I see my disdain for what it is, a cloud. The Dalai Lama treads the wide, dark belt barefoot, 1 foot a blur of motion. In the photo, that forward stepping foot is caught as it comes down hard on its shadow. The sun having come through vines hanging from eaves to find its way through the window into his exercise room. A creature who knows her spiritual dawnings to be both fitful and little, I realize I'm lucky to be fit enough to use my dim-lit basement device. An article called Our Original Goodness is given a page of its own. I read it to see if original goodness and I could ever be found on the same page. I find that my foibles are merely temporary, like the shadow a cloud might cast. Good Lord, I'm already 78. That's the long view of impermanence. But I too am temporary. My faults must be, ergo, ephemeral. I guess I can call that good news. I do, yes, I do want to be that better person, me minus the clouds called praise and blame. In my last dream this earliest morning, mishearing what a friend said, or not hearing it at all, I let that missed hearing slide by. I pretended to understand. A big mistake. My friend got heat-flushed, angry at me. The sun tells me to stop making things worse, to simply become the however better me I long to be. It says to look for something small, find something large. Okay, in my dream, I cry. My friend cries, yet she lets me circle her in my arms. She doesn't shove me away. I'll take what I can get. I am this half-deaf and wildly nearsighted son, lowercase son, waiting to rise. Having embraced the aftermath of my murky fumbling, I am not the clouds. Then I'm awake, one small sun. I grew up in Southeast Portland, and my maternal grandparents lived in Northeast Portland, beloved grandparents. My grandfather was a furrier. My grandmother worked with him, mainly making the linings for coats and jackets for stoles. Their fur shop was on Northeast Sandy Boulevard, the Alaska Fur Shop. Although I loved my grandparents dearly, I had very ambivalent feelings about the fur shop, the pelts, the skins, watching my grandfather work them. Each time I was there in the Alaska Fur Shop, I knew I was inside a house of animal souls. My grandfather made coats for me as I was growing up. And when I was 10, maybe 11, I was fairly tall by then, I would occasionally try on customers' coats or fur pieces in front of the showroom's huge three-way mirror. The word coney, C-O-N-Y, is in the poem I'm going to read for you now. Rabbit, coney. A furrier's grandchild. Once I'd taken my first step, my grandfather made me a fur coat and matching hat, white coney. My grandmother made the lining, pale satin to lie between the pelt's snapped underside and my skin. In a year, I would outgrow that coney coat. But there would be others, each just my ascended size, and hundreds of customers' coats, the chinchilla, mink, and Persian lamb, I later tried on in front of the fur shop's triptych mirror, their length dragging the floor, their sleeves overtaking my wrists and hands. Each time I entered an animal's skin, I could feel the soft clutch of its death, cool, sleek, gleaming. I stroked that terrible beauty. Each time the animal let me peel it away from my shoulders, let me return its fallen weight to hang from the rack's iron bar, I emerged, reborn. The Alaska Fur Shop's symbol was a wolf, head thrown back, howling, a symbol that was on each label, in each coat or cape or stole. The term guard hair is in this poem, and the guard hairs on fur are the longer, stiffer strands of fur that kind of curve over the soft underfur to protect them. This poem has an epigraph. The epigraph is a Hailtsuk belief, and the Hailtsuk are a Bella Bella tribe from British Columbia. The Hailtsuk belief is this: a wolf does not appear to us unless it wants to tell us something. My muse. On the Alaska Fur Shop label inside each jacket, stole, and cape my grandfather made, a she-wolf lived. With every garment of animal skins, she made herself seen, her silhouette outlined by tiny gray stitches. Throughout my childhood, she threw her head back, opened her jaws, and keened to me without ever making a sound. When I finally began to write poems, she told me, in no uncertain words, to what I make, she is sister. She and my poems speak the same tongue. Both have guard fur glinted by silver, thick coats mantled with pollen. Both slip through the night to bare their throats to sing. I find cave art immensely powerful, primordial, archetypal, and I'm especially taken with primitive images of a human being with an animal head, an antlered animal head. Those are magic images. For me, they graphically show our connection to the animal world. They stunningly evince a human's animal soul. Now, these figures are male, but there's no reason for them not to be female. No reason at all. In this poem that I'm going to read for you next, the antlered figure is female. And the term velvet is in this poem, meaning the soft fur covering freshly grown antlers that will be eventually shed, rubbed off. And actually, it's a very valuable substance. Many people in parts of the world consider it a potent medicine. Dear woman, antlers prong from a spot above each ear. What begin as tender lumps erupt into velvet-clad branches, lolling her head from side to side. Heavy prongs, a sharpness to rend low-lying clouds, to tatter the cold morning air with their slicing swing, her own forest clash and clang. By her constant rubbing on the pine's pitch bark, she burnishes their nap into bronze. The itch of them, the velvet sloughing off in long tatters. They heft and sway, this weight of succor, of animal soul, her shaman crown. Wherever her eyes now touch, she sees kin erupting from the world's skin, Morels shrug the duff aside. Anthills swell and seethe. The whole forest floor wells, buckling into its dark nether self. In parts of South America, people call hummingbirds little holy ones. Little holy ones. This next poem I'm going to read for you is in direct address, which means in it I speak directly to one of those little holy ones. In this poem, I speak to a hummingbird. The poem is entitled Piecework, as in Piece work, work done piece by piece, piecework. Hummingbird, you pulse and probe. Bloom by bloom, your needle beak stitches our world together. Fine, overcast stitches taken deep within each flower's throat. You piece this world together. You pick it apart. Undoing nectar from a stamen's base, your thin beak pulls the thread of sweetness out. You, who might be coaxed to sip sugar water from my tongue, could I hold still long enough? All too soon, my hummingbird, I will hold still long enough. Promise me you'll stitch my lips together, make of them a blossom closing. In ancient lore, and if my memory serves me, this is in Eastern European lore, there's a tale wherein a woman pursued by an attacker throws her comb over her shoulder, and the comb becomes a thick copse of trees blocking the attacker's way. I love that. Such marvelous transformation, such magic at a woman's fingertips, such power in the mundane. Pursued by what frightens me, I run. I throw my thick-toothed comb behind me. It becomes a forest dense with straight-trunked trees, and I run. Through my fingers, I let slip the chain of my silver necklace. It meanders itself into becoming a sun-gleamed river, current that must be forded. Over my shoulder, I fling a strand of gray hair glinting on my jacket's dark lapel. It weaves itself into the web of a boulder-sized spider. In my wake, as I run, I let my favorite purple scarf go, the scent of perfume I've pressed into my nape, thickening its weave. The scarf creates a narrow field of lavender drowse that must, by what's closing in on me, be crossed. Weary of running, I falter, I stumble, until behind me I leave my shadow. Cut loose from my body, it widens. A darkness, the shape of me, it swallows my fright whole. I slow, walk, stroll. This poem is called The Fall, as in the biblical fall, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. This is a persona poem, and by that I mean that the voice speaking in the poem is not my voice, it is the voice of Eve. So this is Eve talking to you. The Fall. From the start, most things were horizontal. I didn't have to reach up for the apple. Gleaming, it hung at eye level. Once my teeth grazed its blushing skin, the serpent sidled away. A level path led Adam and me out the garden gate. What's called the fall from grace was more a lateral move, one not up the stairs or down, but across the hall, not higher or lower, no, to the other side of the tracks. I pulled my worldly goods in the bed of a little wagon. I rolled my stuff from Eden to the forwarding address. The road was rocky, but I could see our route stretching out for miles. The only mention of falling came from Adam. That whole way, he nagged me to fall in step behind him. The work of titles for poems is a very interesting work. That last title, The Fall, of course I'm counting on people picking up right away the allusion to the biblical expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Here's another poem whose title's work is substantial, or a title that I hope is going to be doing some substantial work. This poem's title is Yin, Y-I-N, Yin, as in yin and yang, the inseparable elements of the whole, yin being the female component, yang being the male component, but each of us contains both in varying proportions. The title of this poem, Yin, alerts us that this poem isn't so much about men and women, women and men per se. It is about the female principle and male principle present in each of us. This poem also alludes to being able to stand behind a waterfall, which is a stunning experience. Yin. You'd think water's female aspect would be a pond, a lake, deep, reflective, still, taking the sun and moon and clouds onto its slick, shimmered skin. Wrong. You would be dead wrong. Being a woman, I know at least that much about water. One high summer day, I stood behind a waterfall in a shallow cave scooped out of the cliff's base. Through the cascade, I looked out and down at the roiling pool where the waters falling came to its end. Din pummeled my ears. Mist weighted my hair. The air, smelling of skunk cabbage, willow, and mullein, tasted fecund and wet. Deafened, mute, I gazed through that plummet, joining a world on high to the one below, and I knew. The man is rock, still, ever still, afraid to give up his hard-won place far above the rest. The woman sweeps right over his prominence. In sheer freefall, she heads down to earth, hell-bent to reach the sea. I already mentioned that I was born in Portland, and I was here until I graduated from high school. And then I came back to Portland in 1991. But for 31 years, I lived in Klamath Falls, Eastern Oregon. Elevation 4,300 feet, high plateau country. Windy country, frequently windy. Frequent enough that the wind often wore me down, made me cranky, made me think ill of wind. Then, recently, I encountered a Navajo belief, and I had to reconsider. Here's the Navajo belief. The Navajo say wind was the first person to inhabit the earth. The first person to inhabit the earth was wind. I needed to do a little attitude adjustment. Proper tribute. East of the mountains where I once lived, wind blew most of the time. Its strafe and chafe whittled me down. In spring, it blew the newfangled green right off the barely leafed trees. In winter, it sent braces of rain and snow on horizontal journeys, seeing how long it could keep them airborne before letting them reach the ground. I turned myself straight into its force so my hair wouldn't whip my face. I kept my head lowered. Had I known then who wind was, I could have mustered more attention, could have paid my due respects. I saw it shatter to pieces a huge lake's surface. I saw how, when it rose, the birds, crows and grosbeaks, even the egrets, disappeared. I could hear the telephone lines singing, wind's day and night inside out, first person meddlesome song. Bowing my head even lower, I could have at least tried to hum along. Poets talk about white space on a page, the silence a poem contains and conveys, open space, breathing room, stanza breaks, caesuras, the beauty of deep, thick margins. This poem is called Margin, and in this poem, velvet is the fabric, the cloth velvet. Margin. Line after line, the page offers to fill and fill, but not too full. Gives the lake of words its banks. A lake cannot be itself without shoreline. Bread, as it bakes, must have plain surrounding air, so the flourish of yeast can overtake breath and make the mouth swim with craving. Velvet must have its wide selvage. Only from the contrast to its hard, flat weave can fingers feel the silk's feral plush. White periphery is the page's wild, stark yonder, a home for what stalks a story, what haunts a poem. What is dream, if not waking's deep, open edge? Fairy tales, lore, legend, they often contain a magic mirror, a mirror to which you can pose a question, a mirror that responds by telling you the truth. I propose this. There's only one shape a magic mirror could possibly be. One shape. Why a magic mirror can be only round. What your hand lifts up to your eyes catches you at a moment both not too early and not too late. The needle on sorcery's gauge being precisely at odds with empty. Ask the mirror your question. Its answer will be true, exactly. Your face is a sun. Nothing but this fullest moon can hold you. And here's a poem for the moon. A bowed sliver, the dark animal's silver claw, an ear cupped for the hearsay of another's light, sky orchid, pewter paw print above the horizon. The one who would use a forest fire smoke to paint her skin orange. Breath stealer, double dealer having come around. The night's steadfast changeling. Song of a single bell, the moment before it's rung. The moon, that moon, the earth, every planet, every person, we are all, everything in our world is made, of course, from the stuff of stars. This paper was the tree that was the seed that was once a star. Even a plastic pen comes from the same stuff. This poem is called A Backstory Beyond My Recounting. Unaccountably old, the world is a world-class self-starter, ever used to making itself anew again and again out of the makings of itself, from that first stellar stuff. I must take care in such a world, careful of where I place my feet, of what I pick up, of how I use whatever gleams so old in my hand. I'm writing myself onto this page that was once a pine, that was once a pine, that was cone, that was cloud, not so long before having been ocean, that was the prior glint of rain. With care, I must choose the words to write onto this sea, that too is a seed, that too is the sky's overcast. This moment's ink lays down its darkness, giving off a wet light before it dries. The pen in my hand has, just 5 words ago, contrived to make that mark of its own name, and now will do so one more time before I end, calling itself reconfigured star. That's what we all are. That's what everything is. Reconfigured star. Human beings. Us too. Human beings, once we were sun worshipers, those who revered the sun. In ancient times, we worshipped the sun woman, the principal goddess who lived inside her sun wheel high in the sky. We worshipped her, capital H, her. Yes, a matriarchy. We worshipped her and the earth's natural forces. We revered the natural world. Pagan? Yes. But having turned our backs on that reverence, we are destroying this sacredly beautiful earth. Reparations. Let the sun woman still live in her house named Sun Wheel, her no-sided, all-sided home, a ray-roomed place of residence. Let each of her arms reach the curve of those rounded walls, her fingers touching the bowed glass of every bay window. Such windows are numbered enough for her light to find its way out and into the all of this world. Her rays make the noise of trumpet vine blooms. Her beams create both the roil of sugar ants boiling from their hill and the sweetness to feed them. She is crown and halo, eye of all. Give us, who once worshipped her, a glimmer of wisdom, the gleam of steady restraint. Let her fierceness be shaded by her mercy, while we attempt the dark work of repair. The dark work of repair. So much to accomplish, so many seemingly insurmountable tasks, and yet the natural world, the sun woman's world, still offers us the balm of its beauty, the healing power of being in its presence. River, ocean, mountain, meadow, flower, bird, tree, all are remedies. And here in this poem are two. Two of the remedies. Because a God has surely entered the body of each swan, I open my eyes and watch for such a winged potion to appear. Because some God surely has driven a pure medicinal mystery into the swell of each tree's fruit, I seek even what most forget to call a fruit. I long to see what came into evergreen being with scarcely a bloom. With undecipherable motion, a lone swan's white tincture of light crosses the sky width of a pond. Huge dug firs drop their cones, tight, redolent fruits, their pitch a scent stolen from our moon's apothecary, our sun's unlabeled vials. A last poem, and this is a poem that contains the word pied, P-I-E-D, as in speckled. And it's a poem that contains this notion. We easily see sunlight on our skin, and we can at times see our moonlit selves too. Well, my eyes aren't good enough, but if they were, I'm sure I could see at night the tiniest bits of starlight on me. Wearing the sky. How can I count on a clock's nonsense, its preening split-second flicks, when tonight's first star will take at least 1,000,000 times my grasp of time to find me with its light? Whenever I stand under a night sky freighted with those stars still alive or not, my body's surface is lit with billions of their gleam points, one for each burning cell within me. inside and out, I am pied, riddled with countless dying fires. On this day of close to longest light, I thank all of you for joining us, and I thank the Milwaukie Poetry Series. May the Milwaukie Poetry Series continue to thrive. May the Milwaukie Poetry Series continue to enrich our lives, poem by poem by poem. Thank you.
The Dalai Lama on his treadmill. A long view of impermanence. One small sun. Coney. Dear woman. Such power in the mundane. A boulder-sized spider. That's quite a big spider. The yin. Din pummeled my ears. Just some of the wonderful phrases and images that we've just heard.
Thank you, Tom.
I know we're virtual, but you should be imagining now virtual applause.
Oh,
There should be
thank
thunderous applause from all of us who have logged in and were able to see this
Well, and
very rich
my
meeting.
applause to you and to everyone out there for joining us this evening. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We're going to have a bit of questions and answers, and we have some questions here from me and my lovely wife Jane, who is here in the audience, and we have a chat feature. So if you have a question for Paulann and you want to put it in the chat, we will try to take a couple of those questions. So we will have this for a bit, and then Paulann is going to conclude the evening with a final poem. So I think I'd like to start and ask you who you're reading.
Who am I reading?
Who do you like now?
Yeah, who am I reading right now? I am reading Louise Glick. I am reading the volume of her poetry, 50 years of her poetry. I believe that the dates are 1962 to 2012, poems collected from those years. So I have developed in the last, I would say maybe 3 years or so, a kind of morning practice. The first thing I do, well, I get a cup of tea. And then I have been reading a few poems, sometimes more than a handful, but usually just a handful each morning. And I keep a journal. I often copy one of the poems into the journal or copy an excerpt from the poem into the journal. And I have, for the past month or so, I think, been immersed in the spectacular work of Louise Glick. Before that, it was Jack Gilbert, his collected poems. Before that, it was Lucille Clifton, her collected poems. Before Lucille Clifton, it was Rumi, the 13th century Sufi poet. And before Rumi, it was Rilke. So I keep pretty good company first thing each day.
Yes, you do. Thank you. There's some comments here in the chat about the wind poem.
About which poem?
The wind.
Oh, the
The
wind.
wind and the wind poem.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that poem came to be?
Well, the poem was definitely occasioned by, I'm backing up here trying to find it. The poem was definitely occasioned by reading that Navajo belief somewhere, I don't recall now where I encountered that, but when I did, wind was the first person to inhabit the earth. Okay, and I thought, and since I've been back in Portland, and of course I grew up in Portland, and we get wind, but not that frequent. And I've been pretty happy to be someplace that isn't as windy as it was in Klamath Falls. And when I read that Navajo belief, I thought, uh-oh, I think I need to adjust something here. So I started to, and of course the poem contains a lot of things about how the wind was. And I am absolutely serious about blowing snow and rain horizontal to the point where you often wondered if it would ever land anywhere. It did, but the wind could be very, very strong in Klamath Falls. So the poem, I won't say it wrote itself, but a lot of the images of what it was like to live in such a windy place sort of tumbled onto the page, and then the newfound knowledge of wind being the first person on earth made me reshape them into a kind of tribute.
Well, thank you very much for that. Lots of wonderful comments and congratulations on the chat here.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to make them available to you. Ingrid Wendt says, countless dying fires, beautiful, and happy news. The Keystone Pipeline has been effectively canceled forever. Exclamation point.
Oh.
So,
you say I'll get to see those?
mhm.
Thank you.
Yes, we are going to be able to do that. I'd like to ask you, too, about One Small Sun. So, was there any particularly challenging part, more challenging
Of this
than the other
book?
parts? In writing this book, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I am a lyric poet, and most of the poems I read for you today are lyric poems. And the poems in One Small Sun, they are lyric, but they have more of a narrative bent to them. And what happened was I, over the years, had a kind of a handful of more narrative poems that seemed to me to have something going in them, that they were working. And I had never every once in a while one would slip into one of my books, and as I looked at that little group of poems, I thought to myself, maybe I could do a book of poems with stories to tell, poems that are aching to tell their stories. And that's what I did. I've sort of told myself, I can do this. I can do it. And so, and it was challenging, but also very exhilarating. It was wonderful. And this book is probably as autobiographical as anything that I will ever publish. They're poems about my parents and my grandparents, and being a young mother, and just more of a narrative bent to them. Mm-hmm. So it was a challenge, and then to shape the manuscript and to shape each of the poems in it.
Certainly a challenge you met.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to see if Jane has a question.
Well, I am wondering, what got you started writing poetry, and how did that evolve?
I wrote, actually, we all didn't we all write a few poems in grade school? I did that. And, well, that's a whole nother story. My, was it fifth grade teacher, the poem I turned in, she didn't believe I could have possibly written it, and she ripped me up one side and down the other, and, well, anyway. But, and in high school I wrote a few poems, and I actually won an award in high school. But it wasn't until I was a young adult and I was reading the poems that appeared in Saturday Review, that appeared in the Atlantic, that appeared in mostly periodicals, very new, very much unlike the poems that I remembered from the anthologies that we had in high school or even in college. And I loved those poems, and I did very well studying them. But here were these poems in these magazines that seemed like the ink was barely dry on them. You know, they were just, and I was just astonished by them. And I truly, I don't know if I actually said it to myself in this way, but it was like I was saying, I want to do this. This is the most wonderful thing. I want to do this. And I was in Klamath Falls, living in a farmhouse 8 miles out of town, sort of not isolated, but not in the middle of anything either. And I started writing, and I started checking out books of poetry from the Klamath County Library and reading about poetry and writing poems, and then started sending a few out and getting a few published. And so I'm a latecomer to this, but that's a wonderful thing about writing. Writing is very welcoming to latecomers, to late bloomers. Hosanna, I'm glad for that. So that's
Thank you. Thank you.
poetry. Poems brought me to poetry.
Well, thank you, Paulann. And I want to convey the thanks and the gratitude that I read here in the chat. So we don't have time to read them all, but know that the people are expressing thanks and gratitude
Thank you.
this evening. And I want to say that too, on behalf of the whole Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee
Thank you.
and the Milwaukie community for the poems and the consultation and the support that you have given us. So it's truly wonderful, and we are very grateful. So we give thanks again.
Thank you.
And now, Paulann.
It's an honor to be here. I'm grateful to be here. You know that, Tom.
Yeah. Paulann is going to conclude the evening with the final poem.
A last poem, and this is also from One Small Son. It's called Vocation. And I do look at the making of poems as a vocation, a calling. And in this poem, the making of poems, I see as a kind of creation of charms or spells. Vocation. A purveyor of charms, I write spells on pieces of paper, then give them away. A spell to make honeybees not dwindle in numbers. A spell to bless the red of dahlias that bring bees flurrying to a garden. One to bless the wedding of two women friends, each at the other's nectar mouth. Another to toast two men cloven together for 25 years. A chant for seeds waiting to be buried so they can rise again in leafy flourish. Songs for yeast bread, for the bit of borrowed sun in an oven's heat. Plain charms, not so plain. Charms that require the wind for translation. Some people inform me that no one will value what's given away. To them, I'll present my bill. A dime per charm, enough to buy pretty paper for more. Then I'll fashion the spell that makes a dime payment enough to make scoffers into believers. I'll conjure a niggling charm, one to keep those ants who yearn to live in my house outdoors. Then a ring of words biting its own tail, making the circle that keeps all crawling creatures a-crawl. White magic spelled out in black ink on a pale page. On my list of spells to do, I'll put a rabbit's foot worth of words to keep loved ones whole. Another for the balm called healing, if my first attempt should fail. A charm to make the number of sunlit hours and the time tomatoes need to ripen come out even. An abracadabra so my husband avoids the blind alleys of Wall Street. A sleight of hand to keep my right hand writing. A wishbone inviting me to make the tug from my side so even, so steady, the wish never needs to stop. Thank you.
The wish never needs to stop. Thank you, Paulann,
Thank you.
for a wonderful reading. Emmett Wheatfall is going to be here in July. Good night, everybody. Thanks for being here. Be safe.